Just for a moment, you might like to pause and think about the names that you're called. And there'll be a variety of names that you are called. I know that I'm called, Clemency will call me one thing. Other members of my family will call me other things. My three children each have a different name for me. I'm Dad or Dads or Dadsy, depending on which one of them's talking to me. The name that probably means the most to me right now is Papa, which is what my grandchildren call me. But then there is all sorts of things that, or places where I have very specific names. When I go online, the name that seems to be most common is Kelvin at highgate.net.nz. That's at least what I've got to fill in to identify myself. And the Inland Revenue Department knows me by a long number, and the Transport Authority knows me by another number, the one that's on my driver's license. And when I meet many people around the diocese, they call me Bishop, which always takes me by surprise somewhat. Or people call me Kelvin, or they call me Father sometimes, depending on which church I'm going to. And the name depends on who's talking to me, because this is a really important thing about naming. Naming is about the relationship we have with the thing that we are naming. And the name that we give doesn't really define the thing that we're naming. It defines us. When I give a name to something, it tells you more about me than it tells you about the things that are being named. That's an important concept when we look at this passage from Matthew's Gospel. Jesus asked, "What are people naming me?" And when the disciples tell him, what they're telling him is about not Jesus, but the people who have assigned those names. They have summed up their relationship to Jesus and therefore summed up themselves. So there's the first important point that I want you to notice from this passage. That names tell you more about the namer than about the named. And then when we think about that, think about the second little part of this passage, where Jesus in turn names someone. He names Simon Peter. He says, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of hell will not prevail against it." And there's an extraordinary thing. Because if you look at the Peter as he is presented in the Gospels up to this point in the story, and in fact afterwards, he's the least rock-like person you've ever come across. He's a person who's led around by his own emotions. He's a person who is mercurial and whose opinions change seemingly with the circumstances. He's a person who is prone to take actions for no good reason. And as we know, within a very short time of being named thus by Jesus, he's someone who will betray Jesus, not for any other reason than that he doesn't want to appear stupid before a soldier or a serving maid. And yet, Jesus looks at him and names him the rock and says, on this rock, I will build my church. Isn't that extraordinary? And again, what this naming does is tell you more about Jesus than it tells you about Peter. Because Jesus is looking at this mercurial and unstable man and seeing somewhere in the depths of him what he can become and what he will be. Now, hold those together in your head. That the name tells you more about the namer than it does about the named. and the fact that Jesus will name this man in such a way. And what it brings us to is the question which I want you to carry into your groups in a few seconds' time. These two questions. What do you call Jesus? And what does that say about you? And the second question, what does Jesus call you? What does Jesus call you? Amen.